So in the past two sessions, we've been considering how our powerful inner enemies, our karma, and our negative afflictions have or continue to drag us around, right? So behind the scenes and quietly kind of underwriting these two hooligans, these two troublemakers, lies, the big boss, right? So who's the big boss? The big boss has got to be ignorance, right? We've been talking about ignorance. And what is ignorance? So ignorance is that mistaken understanding of reality. And we'll be talking more about that in the final session in the next class. But so before we move on to talk about, death and impermanence and the theme that there's not really a theme. So we've been talking about the four seals, right? And so the first one is all that is conditioned is impermanent. The second is that all that is tainted is suffering, or all emotions are painful. The third is that all phenomena are empty, they're without inherent existence. And the last is that nirvana is peace, or nirvana is beyond extremes, right? So today we're going to be talking about all compounded things are impermanent. But I wanted to just pick up on a couple of points for the seal that we talked about in the previous two classes, which is that all emotions are painful. So we all know that being reactive and having big feelings about situations and people, that's uncomfortable. That's a state of an unsettled, disturbed mind. And when we're in that, we find ourselves in that state of mind, then it's very natural for us to just, lash out in anger, to have a reaction, where we're hurting somebody else because, we're in a uneasy, an unhappy pain, or it's out of pain, right? We react out of pain. And so that just continues to escalate, a situation, and we can end up, losing a lot of friends that way, right? And so we've talked about how non-virtuous acts, acts that harm others, create, suffering now and suffering in the future. And that's why it's really important to understand the inner workings of karma and the disadvantages of the negative emotions, right? So by really studying those two topics, as we touched on in the last class, then that gives you the tools that you need, the skills that you need, so that you combine that with mental vigilance, right? That capacity to watch your mind, watch your responses as they arise, so that you will refrain from harming others, okay? And so in the book, Approaching the Buddhist Path, the authors, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Venerable Trudgen, they describe a gradual progression in how our motivation can turn towards caring for others. So I just wanted to summarize this really quickly because it's really important. So initially, we may think, okay, I'm going to refrain from the 10 non-virtuous acts of, killing, stealing, lying, etc. But my motivation is really just to stay out of trouble, okay? It's to avoid punishment, right? And so I think we all relate to that, right? I don't speed down the highway because I see the, cop around the corner. I don't want to get a ticket. So, while that restraint is beneficial, it's not particularly, there's not a whole lot of virtue behind it, right? You're just doing the right thing to check the box. But it does have the benefit of, helping preserve, safety and peace in our relationships in the community, right? So then the next step up from that would be that the thought that, killing and stealing and lying, those are non-virtuous acts, right? And so if I do those, then I have to experience the consequence of those non-virtuous actions in the future, like not just in this life, but even after death. And that suffering can be, just unimaginably great. And we talked about in the last class some of the correspondence between the non-virtuous acts and the results they ripen into in the future. So while this type of self-restraint is I was going to say it's a self-referenced, but meaning like selfish, right? It comes down to a selfish motivation of preventing your own suffering in the future. It's still virtue in the sense that you're thinking about the ethical dimensions of your actions and like in a bigger perspective, right? Not just confined to right now, not getting the little speeding ticket. Okay. And then the third step is thinking from the perspective of the other person that you might be harming, right? So you think, oh, this person, this sentient being, right, wants to be happy, just like me. This sentient being wants to be free from suffering. And her life is as sacred, as valuable, as worthy, right, of living as mine. There's no difference between myself and others, okay? And so out of that type of ethical restraint, then we refrain from harming others. So you see how it's a little different, right? So you think, oh, well, I could, grab that kid's, wallet. But, why would I do that? Because she's going to suffer, right? And so instead, I'm going to respect and do everything I can to protect her. And so I will refrain from robbing the poor child. And so the point is that the action of restraint then is the same, right? You're refraining from harming somebody else, but you can see that the intention, the underlying intention is different, right? And so the virtue that's created then is also, like of a higher caliber. Because, in this example that I just gave you now, right, you're intentionally caring for somebody else by not harming them, you're refraining from harming them. You're considering your effects on the other person. Then finally, the even more advanced motivation would be to restrain ourselves from harming others, not only because it would cause them pain, in this life, but even looking, way in big picture, right? It interferes with our own ability to be able to attain, higher states, right? All the way up to Buddhahood. If you keep engaging in harmful actions, then that's going to be like, putting you back. Every time you take a step forward, you do something non-virtuous, you're going to fall back a few steps, right? So in that sense, you are preventing yourselves from being able to be of the greatest benefit to other beings. Okay. And so we'll talk more about this idea of working for the benefit of others on the path to enlightenment in the next class. But I thought that was a beautiful illustration of how, our motivation for practicing or leading an ethical life, is related to the karmic results that we will experience, in the future. So I think it's good to keep in mind. And as we progress along our spiritual path, as we deepen our understanding of what it means to live an ethical life, and we open ourselves to others, then all of this, comes together with in a very natural way. Okay. Another point that I wanted to clarify or emphasize was a sense that while disturbing emotions may arise, very naturally in our minds, the good news, right, is that they're temporary. They can definitely be eliminated. And so a great part of the Buddhist path then is working on eliminating these temporary negative emotions. And so to go into this a little more in depth, the point is that although the negative emotions are an intrinsic part of the mind, right? They haven't like penetrated into the core nature of the mind, which is to be clear and cognizant. Okay. And so with wisdom, which we'll talk about again in the next class, but this wisdom consciousness, this wisdom, which is like a skill that we're developing through study and meditation, listening to the teachings, we develop wisdom, and this wisdom skill that's able to eradicate ignorance and its henchmen and its hooligan friends, which are the emotions. Okay. And so the stronger the wisdom grows, then the weaker the afflictions become. So in contrast, the constructive states of mind can be developed, limitlessly. There's no, we talk about immeasurable love or immeasurable compassion. And so there's the sense that they're completely unbounded, right? So it's not like, and it's, when we think about that, it seems our minds naturally are so limited, right? We can't, it's just when you start thinking of like astrophysics, or at least for me, when I think like billions and billions of galaxies and like, gazillions, like that whole concept for me, with my little mind, is really hard to grasp. So I think this is somewhat similar. We really have to go into this with trying to expand our minds. So it's not like, when you think of infinite love and infinite compassion, right? It's not like a big piece of pizza. When you have more people to share the piece of pizza with, each piece gets tinier and tinier and tinier, right? So this is the opposite. This would be like, having a family with one child that child isn't going to be more loved than if you have 2 children or 3 children or 4 children, right? Your love just keeps expanding. There's no boundary to it in that sense. Okay. So these constructive states of mind, which we're developing, are related to the fundamental nature of the mind, which then is pure and stable. This innate subtle state mind of clear light, which is the basis of the cultivation of these constructive or virtuous states of mind, then continues without interruption, on and on and on and on. Okay. And so the negative afflictions of anger and hatred and jealousy and attachment and the like can be overcome through wisdom, like we just said, right? But in contrast, these constructive emotions, since they are accurate, they're based on accurate perception, they're completely different from the negative emotions that are rooted in ignorance, right? And so the really cool thing is that once we become, our minds become imbued with these positive emotions, these virtuous states, then we don't have to continually make an effort to cultivate them or to hang on to them. They just continue on, and they become an integral part of our motivation. So as we attain higher levels of the spiritual path, particularly as we become bodhisattvas and Buddhas, then it's just effortless. So that's good to know, right? Because otherwise you might think that these virtuous states of mind would also be temporary, but that's not the case. Okay. So seen in this context, the statement that all emotions are painful, this was a question that came up after class. When you say that all emotions are painful, does that include joy and compassion, right? And all those nice feelings. So if we would think, if that's included in the constructive emotions that we just were talking about, then it would seem like they could be eliminated. But I think that that statement, all emotions are painful, is actually referring just in the context of ordinary beings, such as ourselves, instead of the minds of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, right? So the point being that ordinary love and compassion, right, when it's tainted with, attachment, or tainted with this idea of impermanence, right, of being here one day and gone the next, right, then that kind of ordinary love and compassion, that's an emotion that is painful in the sense that, it's subject to change. Okay. So another question that came up is, if all emotions are all I should qualify that. If all painful emotions are temporary, then can we say that somebody is purely evil? Is anybody like evil through and through with, no chance of redemption, right? And so that brings up, questions about criminal justice and the whole social, yeah. Anyway, according to Buddhism, I don't think that that's the case, because, there are many examples in the teachings of, even somebody, a mass murderer who's killed, countless people, is acting out of, what's the underlying motivation, right? So it would be, sheer ignorance, right? Ignorance of cause and effect, being under the control of, the terrible karma that causes the person to be in this habit of killing over and over again, right? And being so helplessly under the control of the negative afflictions that he or she is just powerless and just repeats these behaviors, okay? So there are many stories from life stories of the Buddha where the Buddha has engaged in actions to stop murderers from that terrible habit by showing them the path, okay? So no matter how terrible, the deeds are that we commit, we can definitely, purify our misdeeds and eventually become free from that type of suffering and attain enlightenment. In addition, evil, like with capital E, evil doesn't exist as some kind of external, independent, permanent force out there. Maybe like the devil or Satan. That doesn't really exist in Buddhism. And when Prince Siddhartha was deep in meditation under the Bodhi tree, before he attained enlightenment, right? Then you probably have heard that story about he was attacked by Mara, right? Mara, and you say, oh, well, who's Mara? But Mara wasn't just an evil, devil that came out of like nowhere, right? Mara was actually, Prince Siddhartha's the remnants of his own self-grasping ignorance, right? So it's an internal enemy that we all confront, right? So what's the appropriate way then to think of, violent, corrupt people of that like? So absolutely, it's very, very difficult to develop genuine love, and compassion for people who are harming our loved ones, our community, our society, even us as individuals, right? But again, we need to work with our own perception of such people, of people like that, right? It's an internal hostility that we fear, that we hold towards them. And so it's an internal process of softening our hearts, changing our attitudes to them. And there are many, many practices, many ways in which we can do that. And I will talk a little bit more about that in the next class. Okay. And so there's, just to provide one very nice quote that addresses this point. Even if others should seek to cut off my head, though I've done them not the slightest wrong, to take upon myself out of compassion all the harms they have amassed. This is the practice of all the bodhisattvas, right? And so a bodhisattva is somebody who's on the walking the Buddhist path, practicing, love and compassion, right? So in today's session, we'll talk about impermanence and death. So this is, one of those topics that we sometimes can feel, uncomfortable thinking about, and familiarizing ourselves with this, getting comfortable with death and impermanence is really important, though, because we all know that, it's an death in particular, that they're inevitable, right? And so by accepting our mortality, then it enables us to appreciate every moment of our lives. And we can appreciate our lives even more, knowing that, it could end at any time, right? And so this whole topic is intended to help us become comfortable with our fragility and our vulnerability. And, since at the most fundamental level, our mortality is what we share in common with, other human beings and all living beings, right? So this is a meditation topic. This is a practice that we can use to help create a stronger sense of connection with others. Okay, really, really good, important point. So seeing, just how sentient beings are like bubbles on the surface of a moving stream, incredibly, incredibly fragile. Lifespan is so short, right? And just like doctors and nurses and rescue workers and, all the other heroes out there, we too can find joy in saving lives, many, many opportunities out there. So we're looking at the seal, just a reminder. All composite things are impermanent, or also translated as all that is conditioned is impermanent. So there are two classes of objects or things, conditioned and unconditioned, right? Because the theme says all that is conditioned is impermanent, right? So without going into great detail, here we're talking about conditioned or composite things, meaning phenomena that are caused or created by somebody, such as, like a painting or the light, that was produced, right? Manufactured, fabricated. Or it could be something that is produced, by nature, right? Like a flower. But it's the point is just that it's the coming together of different, materials and other factors that produce something. And because they come together in a certain way, then, our minds, based on our education and our culture, et cetera, would then label that collection of stuff that's assembled in a certain way as, oh, okay, it's a flower, right? Because it's got, petals and a stem, et cetera, right? And so in that sense, we would recognize and be able to interact with that object, okay? So in this context of impermanence and death, the point just to be made is that because conditioned things come together as the result of these different factors collecting, then when those supporting conditions change, right, then like in the case of our bodies, right, so we're here as as human beings right now, right? But and we seem to be, you know, like permanent and like we're not changing, you know, at a very gross level. But as the conditions change, meaning like, you know, we don't get enough food, or we get dehydrated, we don't drink enough, we don't get enough exercise, right? So we start getting all flabby or whatever. If we don't eat our fruits and veggies, you know, we can have all kinds of health problems, right? So what I'd like to do now is just to talk a little bit more about the nature of suffering, because that underlies or is goes part and parcel with this idea of death and impermanence. Okay, and so the first noble truth describes, you know, the nature of suffering. Right, suffering exists. So suffering doesn't refer to, you know, feeling like, oh, I feel bad or something, you know, in that very, very limited sense of the word, but rather it's important to understand that it refers to the entire, like it's the whole enchilada. It's the body, it's the mind, it's all of the objects that are involved in producing, you know, a painful feeling. And so for those of you who have been studying Buddhism for a while, then you will know that there are many different classifications of suffering, right? This is a really big topic. So there are like over 100 different kinds, and then we get down to 8 types of suffering, and then 6, and then 3. So if you're, you know, studying the Lam Rim, then you would know, have some familiarity with this topic. So the 8 types of suffering are birth, old age, right? Sickness and death. The suffering of meeting the unpleasant. The suffering of separating from the pleasant. The suffering of not getting what you want. And the suffering of clinging to a sense of self, a personal identity. Right? And so we've, I think indirectly, we've talked about all of those to a certain extent in the past couple of classes. So the 8 kinds of suffering are then condensed down to 6 and then down to 3. And since we are short on time, we're going to take a closer look just at this classification of 3 types of suffering. And so again, you know, before I go into this, you know, the idea is not just to be like, you know, depressing or, you know, that's like a downer or anything. The idea is to think that this is our, you know, our lived experience, right? This is what we are all experiencing on a day-to-day level. And so by being, thinking about these teachings with an open mind and then checking, you know, does this make sense? Maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe you think it's completely, you know, completely wrong. But what we're going to do is just at least examine these ideas and take them out for a test drive. Okay. So the first is, I'm going to start with the suffering of change. So there are 3: the suffering of change, right? The suffering of suffering, and pervasive suffering. So we're going to start with the suffering of change, which just means that we can, you know, start out in a happy, pleasant state of mind, right? But this is compared to actually being a painful open wound. Okay, so even though you're in that happy state of mind, with that's actually not the case. The truth is that actually we're more like a painful open wound. And when you have a painful open wound, and then you temporarily relieve the pain by putting on, you know, some cooling medication or cool water, then that change, you know, from the painful experience to the not so painful experience, that is what we mistake for pleasure. Okay, so it's just like a lessening of pain. And then after a while, it turns back into pain, right? So a quick example would be like you go for a hike, but then after a few miles or after a few hundred feet, you get tired, so you have to sit down on a bench, right? And so you sit on the bench, but then after a while, you're like, oh, that felt really good. But then after a while, maybe your back starts to hurt from sitting on the hard bench, right? So then you're going to get up and you're going to move again, and then after a while, you get tired again, like, so it's up and down, right? Up and down. Or another quick example would be, you feel really hungry, and so to stop the discomfort of feeling hungry, then you go out and you get something to eat. But after you eat, then your stomach starts to feel a little bit bloated or maybe a little bit queasy. And so, that again, that's just more uncomfortable feelings, more pain. So, the point to be made here is that in that sense, what we take for granted as being a form of happiness is really just a temporary relief in what's actually suffering. Okay. And so the suffering of change includes the feelings, whether they're pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And also all the thoughts, the conceptual thinking that went through that process, right? Like, so if you think you're hungry, then you think, oh, the conceptual thought would then be, oh, I got to go get something to eat. Well, what should I eat? Blah, 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 right? That whole train of thought. It includes, the food in that example. So it's that whole, like, 3-dimensional karmic experience, okay? So then the next one is the suffering or the suffering of pain. So that's like being a unhappy, painful open wound, but then, just aggravating it and making it even more painful, right? So that's easy to understand. It's just an increase in a situation that's already bad, making the bad situation worse. And then finally, pervasive suffering, or sometimes it's translated as the suffering of conditionality. So here you're talking about the experience of neutral feelings, right? So when we're in a neutral state, we're not feeling happy, we're not feeling bad, right? Most of the time, we're just in a neutral state, right? There's no strong feelings one way or the other, right? And so that neutral state of mind is also the result of karma coming together. And it's described as being the big open wound, meaning that, we're very, very vulnerable and we're subject to impermanence, okay? And so this pervasive suffering is, kind of like our baseline. I would call it the baseline. Because it pervades, all of our experience. So again, it's worth reiterating that as with the other two types of suffering, then this pervasive suffering is not just the feeling, like feeling neutral, right? But it's the whole experience. It's that whole potential for future suffering, right? And so in that sense, because it's that potential for future suffering, then we can say that pervasive suffering is the root of the other two, the suffering of change and the suffering of suffering, okay? All right, so with that in mind, right?
Anila,
Louisa.
I'm sorry, I think I lost the plot a little bit. Can you just say a couple more words about the suffering of suffering?
So suffering of suffering is, again, it's just that's the easier one to understand, because it's you're already in a situation that hurts, you're in a bad situation, like maybe you're already too hot. I don't know why I pick hot. It's cold out. You're already cold. You're already too cold, and then you have to go out and run to the mailbox to check the mail, and so you run out and you're just like really, really cold, right? Because you go out, you don't put your coat on. right? So it's any painful situation that just gets, you know, even more painful. It's an increase in,
Thanks. Thank you very much.
okay. No, it wouldn't necessarily just be physical. Yeah, it could be mental as well. Yeah, so if you're depressed, then you get more depressed, you know, something like that. Okay, so to look at this, relating it, you know, more specifically to ourselves, then it's helpful to look at the model of the mind. That's not the right way. Model of the Buddhist understanding of the body and the mind, okay? Because we're talking about suffering, right? And so who's suffering? What's suffering, right? That's the segue here. And so there's this term that you'll hear, appropriating aggregates, or the view of the perishing aggregates, or the view of the transitory collection. There's several different ways of translating this, but the bottom line is that these terms refer to the different aspects, or the different factors that, when taken together, we identify as ourselves, right? There's a sense of personal identity that is based on these 5 factors. So they're the form, feeling. So this is related to yourself, your form, like your physical form, your feelings, perception, which is cognition or discernment, your ability to understand what's going on in your mind and the environment. Formations, many different translations of that, but basically it's the factors for how the mind perceives and apprehends objects. It's all that mental processing. Virtuous mental states, as well as destructive emotions. That's kind of like the grab bag. Very important to understand all of these. And then consciousness. So we've got the 5 sense consciousnesses, and then mental consciousness. So based on this collection of 5 factors, then we label the I.
Hold on, because I've heard the 5 aggregates part, but then I read some things like by Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, and then they talk about 6. So that's consciousness is the one that goes on top of the 5 senses. Is the 6th one there?
Yeah. Well, we've got mental consciousness,
Mental consciousness, right?
and then there's 5 sense consciousness,
Okay.
right? That's right.
So you talk about perception and then formation. Is it close?
Yeah,
Can you just tell us
formations.
a little more about formation. You talked about, when you said formation, you talked about perception in your definition. Where's the separation?
Between perception and formation?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So perception is, it's also translated as cognition or discernment. So I think it's more like you're able to identify objects and then understand what they are, right? Things like that. Some that kind of mental processing. Yeah, right. Whereas formations, it's like it includes emotional states, such as it says virtuous mental states, destructive emotions. It's the mental factors. There are 51 mental factors. So it's kind of like the inner workings of how we perceive and relate to ourselves and reality. Whereas I think perception is it overlaps, but somehow it's a little bit more specific. So like discernment would be like, I can tell the difference between an apple and an orange, or.
So there's 5 aggregates, and they're impermanent like everything else, so we're constantly changing.
Right. Right, so that's kind of where I'm getting at. Yeah, so this idea of the personal identity being being labeled or based on this collection of aggregates that are always changing and that are subject to karma, right? So so Geshe Sopa, and I should have brought the book. I'll bring it next time. Geshe Sopa is um, one of the most well-respected Gelugpa teachers. He's written a series of books, and he defines this. He uses the term appropriating aggregates to refer to this body and mind complex, and so he says appropriating, meaning that they're attached to the things of the present, and they grasp onto things of the future. So I thought that was really interesting. This idea of, being attached to whatever is going on now, right? As well as grasping to things of the future. So you get that element of time in there. And then karma, meaning the we are our five aggregates, our appropriating aggregates would then be the result of actions that were committed, in the past. Okay. So our sense of self, our personal identity, is based on the causes of suffering that we just went into, right? So each of these aspects of our being and the web of experience in which it's embedded, again, it's the product of karma and the afflictions, and it contains the seeds for future suffering. So what we're seeing is that, we are in the nature of suffering. And in order to stop an unpleasant experience, we might do something else, right? So if we're cold, we might turn on the heat, right? And this might make us think that we've succeeded in stopping our suffering, but as we've just been talking about, actually it's just, like another kind of samsaric pleasure that's also suffering, right? So the activity or contaminated action, it's a conditioned action, right? That we've taken, which was to get up and turn on the heat with a kind of like a selfish intent, right? So that contaminated action then is a type of suffering. And so the result is going to be a new form of suffering, okay? So here's a quote that explains this much better. This is from Geshe Sopa. He says, in order to bring an end to the discomfort of the activity you're currently involved in, you try to do something else, right? That brief respite gives you the perception of pleasure, but that samsaric pleasure is in the nature of suffering. So you decrease one kind of suffering only by increasing another. And this is the nature of cyclic existence. Whatever samsaric activity stops one pain by providing temporary relief is itself just another form of suffering. And so when one type of suffering is ceasing, the cause of another new type of suffering is starting. And so in this sense, the ceasing of suffering itself, when it's produced by contaminated or samsaric activities, is itself in the nature of suffering. Oh, that was very interesting. So it's going to be hard to get out of this. Okay. So, all right. There's no permanent unconditioned pleasure or pain. All of this is just the rising and passing away of all conditioned existence. All right, so just to take a step back from sort of this more from this approach, except what are some of the benefits of accepting impermanence and understanding the nature of suffering? So this can really be a tool that we can use. It's an antidote for our fear and anxiety. Okay, so this is the self-help part of my talk here. So what were people worried about 100 years ago? Well, similar to our times, they were worried about war, epidemics, inequalities, maybe whether or not they would be attacked by a bear on the way to the outhouse in the middle of the night. I would have been worried, right? And what about now? Okay, well, there's actually an annual survey of American fears. Anybody read the New York Times? It was in yesterday's New York Times. It was an article about this, very funny. Top of the list, they listed the top 10. The top 10, number 1, government corruption, corrupt government officials. 60% of the people named that one. Then it was economic or financial collapse, Russia using nuclear weapons, the US becoming involved in a world war, drinking water pollution, biological warfare, cyber terrorism. And then it becomes more personal. People I love being ill or dying, not having enough money in the future, right? Because we can all, you know, it's great to live a long time, but your retirement account has to live just as long as your expected lifespan, right? And I thought it was funny that my top, when I was thinking about this, my top of the list was making sure my Wi-Fi connection didn't die. That's like so important. No, I'm just kidding. And what will people worry about in the next 100 years? Right? Could be totally different. Huh?
Robots.
Robots, AI? Yeah, sure. Who knows? But there'll always be something to worry about as long as, you know, we're still on this merry-go-round of cyclic existence, right? It's just, okay. So, but I think that in this, you know, 21st century, at least, you know, in our American culture, worry and anxiety, I think it's safe to say that it's become an entrenched habit, right? It's like a cultural thing. And one of the greatest sources of anxiety then is feeling that we're not in control of our lives. We can see changes at the gross level. The natural environment is unstable, you know, workplaces are no longer stable, et cetera. And people move around so much, right? It's, I think our friendships tend to be shorter, even if we take them online. And so worry can be a habit, and it can be, if, you know, if we find ourselves worrying, that worry can be supplemented or made worse if we're in the company of people who are also worrying, right? So if you find yourself in a group of like neurotic worry warts, and you're the opposite, you know, maybe you don't worry, then that can be difficult too, because you're like, you know, it can be uncomfortable because you don't want to be like left out. So you get wrapped up in worrying just like everyone else, okay? And so in contrast, I found this quote from the Dharmapada, which said, you know, somebody who has transcended mundane, ordinary worries, the quote says, "Oh, with what ease we live when we're relaxed amid the anxious. Amid anxious people, we live relaxed." I thought that was beautiful. So we don't have to be a worrywart just like everybody else, okay? And it's a truism that, you know, we fear the unknown. So it's worth taking a close look at what scares us, you know? Are there, you know, really monsters under the bed or not? You know, go check. How do you know that, you know, you should be worried about something? Is it just because other people are saying it, you heard it on social media or whatever, right? We need to just open the windows and, you know, get out and get rid of all of this, you know, false thinking, all these rumors that just add to our worry. So then, you know, all of this, I think, is related to this idea of impermanence, right? And when we think of impermanence at a more granular level, we base a lot of our assumptions and projections, you know, and best guesses about how things are going to work out, you know, on these ideas, on these conceptions, right? So, for example, I might prepare for a trip to the grocery store on the assumption that my car will indeed start and that I'm not going to slip on the ice on my way to getting into the car. And on the assumption that the grocery store will still be there, right? All those silly assumptions are assumptions, and they, you know, are based on a certain amount of permanence, right? So they're kind of, naive, right? They take for granted a certain kind of permanence, and any one of them could be incorrect, right? I could go to start the car and the battery could be dead. I could fall on the ice on my way to the car, right? The store could be closed for some reason, God forbid. And, generally speaking, although we make all these assumptions, if they don't work out, right, if there's some kind of interruption, then we get really upset, right? We hate it when the store runs out of our favorite brand of bread, especially if it happened to be the case that the bread was on sale that day, right? And they ran out. Oh my God. We also presuppose or project a certain permanence on people and our relationships, right? So when somebody who's usually, very friendly to us suddenly, gives us the cold shoulder one day, then we feel hurt and surprised. We're like, whoa, what happened? And the opposite is true as well, right? Not to always be negative. If somebody who's kind of grumpy to us is all of a sudden, nice and friendly, then that's good too. But for those who we feel close to, right, we make an effort to respect their feelings by trying, again, to kind of guess how they will react in a certain situation so that, we don't get them upset, right? And so we kind of tiptoe around their feelings because we don't want to hurt them. And again, it's based on an assumption that their minds are sort of permanent, like they'll always react, in a certain way, right? And so a quick example about my mom. My mom's 91 years old. She's been through a lot, right? And so I try not to upset her if I don't need to. And so I had, the surgery two weeks ago, and I didn't tell her about it. I'm like, why bother her, right? So I didn't tell her. And I was really careful not to tell her, right? Like, oh, don't say that, make up these little white lies, why I can't go to visit her, blah, 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 right? In the end, when it was all like, it's over, it's cool now, right? No problem, right? I told her, and she's like, oh, she wasn't worried about it at all. She's like, oh yeah, I had that surgery too. It's like, it's not a big deal. I'm like, okay. And instead, she was worried about something totally different. Anyway. So, we know that we're always changing. We know that the other person we're in a relationship with is also changing and that circumstances are changing, right? But, in that sense, it's foolish then to have big plans. It's foolish to have expectations, right? To have, hopes or fears, because we know everything is totally up in the air and that basically we're just being blown around by the winds of karma. Right? But we still make plans. I still got that 5-year plan.
We don't have a choice, really. I mean, it's gonna happen. Whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen.
Gonna
no matter
happen.
How much we plan.
Right, right. So you just have to be open-minded and nimble, agile. Agile is the word of the 21st century, right? Agile. Keep going. Okay. So what can we do to free ourselves from the suffering of fear and worry? So I have to seriously, now that I'm worried that I am not going to finish this, I have to speed this up. Okay. Punchline here is that we need to turn away from our narrow preoccupation with our own little lives, right? We need to deepen our understanding of the teachings on the nature of suffering, right? And impermanence. And with all of that in mind and understanding that everybody is in the same boat, then we can, we have a much stronger, a deeper foundation for growing our compassion, right? And so, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama is always says, humans are social animals, and we thrive when we're in community. And so by following, the Eightfold Noble Path of right view, right aspiration, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, right? So by living intentionally in a way that embraces others, then our narcissistic preoccupation with ourselves will disappear. Okay. All right. So the next topic is death, but I'm just going to talk about this a little bit because what I realized is that we have this excellent facilitator, John Cirillo, who will be giving a series of 4 classes. It's a very detailed presentation about the death process and how to, live a happy life, thinking about becoming familiar with death. So I'm just going to do a really quick summary here. So as we all know, well, actually, that's not true. I'll take that back. If we've lived an ethical life, right? If we've lived an ethical life, then we have nothing to fear, right? And so this life is a preparation for our next life. It's like, being comfortable in one hotel or an Airbnb, right? And then you're moving on to the next one. Right? We're just tenants. We're temporary tenants in our homes. And so if we accept that death can come at any time, then the most important thing is to cut our attachment to our possessions, to our bodies, right? To everything, right? And it's not just renouncing the material objects, the stuff itself, but rather it's turning away from that habit, that grasping mind that causes, rebirth over and over again. Right? And so here's a beautiful quote from Gyaltse Tokme Sangpo from his writings, the 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva. Verse 4, the practice of all the bodhisattvas is to renounce this life's concerns for friends and relatives. Long acquainted must all go their separate ways. Wealth and prized possessions, painstakingly acquired, must all be left behind. And consciousness, the guest who lodges in the body, must in time depart. Okay. All right, and so here's another, this is a longer quote by, again, by Geshe Sopa on karma, the relationship between karma and death. But it really kind of summarizes what we've learned about karma and the perspective on death. Karma is very precise. The suffering that results from negative thoughts and actions can be looked at as a kind of retribution after death comes. That is why death is personified as a being who will punish you for the things you've done. But in fact, there is no Lord of Death, right? There's no Lord of Death who comes to accuse us saying, you did this, now it's time to pay. There's no external Lord of Death. The true Lord of Death is within us, and the punisher is right here inside. The liberator is right here too. We do all of these things to ourselves. We are our own Lord of Death. In the world, an innocent person who hasn't committed a crime generally does not need to be afraid that someone will punish him. Similarly, you have no need to fear death if you avoid non-virtuous karma and accumulate as much virtuous karma as you can. Therefore, a constant recollection of death is your true friend. Okay? So it's like driving down that road. If you're doing the speed limit, you got nothing to worry about, right? You don't have to be looking back thinking, oh, police car's gonna get me, right? Nothing to worry about. You just check out of the Airbnb, move on to the next one. You're good. All right.
Someone once told me, I don't understand this. The good karma, it's a good karma, there's a bad karma, think of it as change of land. Good karma, think of it as change of gold. But what you really want to have is no karma.
Yeah.
Create any.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so the point being made was that the goal then is, excuse me, to break free from this cycle of being born over and over again by creating, both good, non-virtuous and virtuous karma. And so transcending through that whole, cycle of contaminated and uncontaminated actions, right? So Buddha is somebody who's completely free from any of these, any type of karma, and even, emotions.
So, going back to good karma and building up for the next life. How do we make that decision? How do we, if we don't want to make any karma?
Well, so on the way though, on the path though, then the way to do that is to be caring and kind and to make an effort, throughout the course of our life to be of the greatest benefit to others. And so in doing so, then we're accumulating the positive karma, we're accumulating all of the merit that serves as the conditions to be able to, in the future, attain Buddhahood. So you're free from all karmic activity and can remain in a state of perfect transcendence. So you do. So I don't know if I answered your question, but definitely, like for now, when we're on the path, then that's the most important thing, is to be able to benefit others, and in so doing, you're creating positive karma.
Is it appropriate to say that we are in samsara? We cannot create no karma in this existence, but we can create good karma that will lead us to the state of creating no karma.
There you go.
We can't not create karma.
Right,
I'm creating it right now.
right.
But the goal, which is not achievable in samsara, is the equanimity, the existence without volitional tendencies, to not react or desire or harm.
There you go. Thank you. Much better said.
Is that the wisdom realizing emptiness? Is that a part of, I mean, I know it's a part of the path, but is that what severs us? Is that what starts it? Isn't that what Arhat, I guess, like has like directly realized emptiness, and that is what takes us out? The first step of taking karma, or is
That's definitely part of it. Yeah, because you're cutting ignorance, at the root. And so by cutting ignorance at the root, then you stop the 12 links of dependent arising, right? So you stop that process of creating karma, and then the negative afflictions, and then birth, old age, right? So yeah. Janet?
Yours like bodhicitta and wisdom, like those are the two wings, right?
Yeah.
And so we create karma, positive or negative karma, through our actions of body or speech, but the mind, like bodhicitta,
Body, speech, and mind.
is something that is not generating karma, but
No, well,
or is it virtue? Because it's not contaminated. Is bodhicitta mind contaminated karma?
are you you're speaking specifically about the mind of a bodhisattva? And whether
as that's part of what we're working on is, as you've been talking about cultivating compassion and that sort of thing, that change in the mind.
uh-huh.
I'm thinking of Sam's question too, of is that karma? Bodhicitta mind? It's not.
Is it like a karmic result? Is it the result of past actions that allow you to create a bodhisattva's, the mind of bodhicitta? Bodhisattva's mind?
But I suppose that could be a good question. That wasn't my question, but.
Oh, sorry.
But is that something that's free of contaminated plant?
Oh. Well, definitely when you get to the state of full Buddhahood, then you would be, that's the state of being completely free. But so we would have to go back and look at each of the different, so there are 10 grounds, right? So on each of the bhumis, you're stripping away, removing like the afflictive obscurations, like the negative emotions, and then eventually it's the cognitive obscurations, the wisdom. Cognitive obscurations. And so, let's see, on which, eventually, if you become an arhat, then you're free only of the afflictive obscurations, right? Then if you push on to become a full Buddha, then you've gotten rid of both of them. And so a bodhisattva's mind, then is it completely free of karma? I would say, I would hedge it and just say definitely for a Buddha and bodhisattva, maybe depending on where they are in the 10, but I have to look it up. Tough question. All right, so, I want to make sure we do a little bit of this meditation. Okay, so basically, in the Buddhist sense, in terms of the death process, right, there's a very detailed explanation of all of what actually happens at the time of death. But the bottom line, most basic point is just that, the body, of course, is material, and so it's left behind. But this extremely, extremely subtle consciousness continues from life to life. Okay, so it can persist without depending on the coarse physical body, including the brain and nervous system. The subtlest mind is a continuity of ever-changing moments of mind. It's not a permanent self or soul. Okay. So, some of you may be familiar with this, but there is a wonderful 9-point meditation on death. And so if you are, let's see, did I put it here? Oh, where's the quote? I wanted to give you the reference so you could go back and find this on your own. But if you Google it, 9-point meditation on death, it was summarized as one of the Discovering Buddhism. You'll find it, 9-point meditation on death, and then put in FPMT, because there are several different versions. But the FPMT version, it's on the Kadampa Center website. Or
I get all my Dharma materials online, FDMP pretty much.
Yep, that's a good source. What's that? FPMT 9-point meditation.
For the preservation of
It's a mouthful.
helps unify the studies and the kind of curriculum of all the Mahayana.
Anila, it's a little hard to hear people in the room.
Talking about FPMT. and
Gotcha.
Being a good source of information and teachings. So if you email me, I can send you the link if you're interested. Okay, so I'm just going to summarize these, and then we'll do a different meditation on death. So the 9 points are, the first is that death is certain. Okay, death is certain. The time of death is uncertain, and then only Dharma helps at the time of death. And so death is certain has 3 points. The first is that no power in the universe can stop death. The second is that our lifespan cannot be increased. It's decreasing every moment. And then because of that, the time that we have in our lives to practice Dharma is very limited. And then the time of death is uncertain. There's 3 points. So the lifespan in our this day and age, right, is uncertain. So we don't know when we will die. The things that can kill us are many, but the things that keep us alive are few, right? There are many reasons why we could die. And the body is extremely fragile. Only Dharma helps at the time of death. There are 3 points. No money or possessions help us. They may help us, temporarily to extend our lifespan, but, at the time of death, you got to, put everything aside. Friends and family cannot help us, even if they're there at our bedside, but they can't stop us from dying. In fact, when my father was very, very ill, my mom called a friend of his who was like their family doctor, and they'd known each other. I think my dad went to medical school with this friend of his, this doctor. And she finally got through to the guy, and she went, oh, she was so upset. And she's like, oh, this is happening to him, and that's happening to him, and what should I do? What should I do? And finally, the guy just said, he's gonna die. Yeah, she's never forgotten that. That was the end of the conversation. He just hung up. Whoa, okay. Yeah, but he was right? So, nothing can help us at the time of death, not even our own body, of course. This body that we've trusted for so long, right? This body that you think, oh, no, nothing can help. All right. So in terms of a meditation, though, what we need to do is to go through each of these points, one by one, very carefully, until we develop a sense of strong, conviction that this point is indeed, true, right? And so if you can find that meditation, I can send it to you, because each point is elaborated on a little bit further. Another good publication that you might want to look for is by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. It's published by Wisdom Publications in 2020. It's called How to Face Death Without Fear. How to Face Death Without Fear. And it talks about basically 5 different points. First is to give away all your possessions before you die. The second is to generate the wish to practice bodhicitta from now until I achieve enlightenment. I will always strive to cultivate this mind of enlightenment. And then the next is giving up self-cherishing. The power of prayer, which is to take on the suffering of all living beings and generate bodhicitta. And the power of training. And that's a special skill in terms of transferring your consciousness at the time of death. Okay, so the book is How to Face Death Without Fear by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Okay. Any questions before we do the meditation?
So when we talk about death, we're just talking about the body.
We're talking about the body, physically the body is left behind. And then in the Buddhist sense, we have this very, very subtle consciousness that then continues on.
In other words, so our body dies, but our soul doesn't die. Our energy, our something else goes back up into wherever.
It's not.
It's so we don't call it a soul in the sense that, because that kind of implies that it's something that's unchanging. But this very subtle consciousness that is changing from moment to moment, then leaves the body, and yeah.
And then there's different steps and different things like that. But eventually, though, it comes back down into a new body.
Yeah.
Where you'll start your next life in your continuing of lives until you reach nirvana.
Right.
Okay.
Well put.
The concept of, I think something that changed for me is the concept of the consciousness as a process
Hmm,
and not a thing.
yeah, it's a good way of putting it.
Helped me to understand the kind of life to life and continuation. It's not, there's no thing that comes back. It's just, our consciousness is a passing experience which never ends and never began. So there's not like a thing that continues because
Yeah.
the continuation is the thing.
Yeah. We are the process.
It's like,
Yeah.
Or as one of my friends jokingly said, it's Groundhog Day all over again.
Louisa.
Is it helpful to think, I know, I thought I read in like sutra and stuff, different ones that like the consciousness is not in anything here. Like this is all, you know, the aggregates. It's not, it doesn't abide in the aggregates at all. It's some elsewhere somewhere, or not even a place, you know.
Well,
Is it,
no,
is
you've
that
got
true?
it. I don't know if I would go that far. Yeah, right, because the idea is that you've got the mind that is the host of this ever-changing
Oh, okay.
consciousness.
I must have misunderstood it. Thanks.
but your body's just a host.
Yeah,
It's just hosting our consciousness.
I think that's a better way of, yeah, thinking about it.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely the idea of ourselves as this impermanent, always changing, you know, host or it is more like a process in the sense that, you know, it's always changing. I like that
You
idea.
mentioned that the mind, you said the mind is a host, did I hear that?
The body
I heard
body
that.
would be,
I heard that, but
Uh-huh.
that was said, somewhere that I thought you might have said, the mind is a host. Did I mishear that?
not so much.
Say the same thing you're asking about.
Oh,
You
I'm
did
sorry.
say mind and host together,
Mm,
right?
maybe was it in the quote? Maybe I garbled up the quote or something. Mm, I'm just checking to see, because I shortened this quote. I wanted to see if there was anything else that was. Mm, yeah, I think I got it, most of it. Okay. And so the Dalai Lama and Venerable Thupten Chodron, they write, the meditation on death is not to provoke an emotional, panicky fear of death, which is of no benefit at all, but a wise awareness of our own mortality that leads us to set good priorities in life, abandon harmful actions, and live ethically and kindly. That's really important. That's really okay. So we're going to try to do this meditation from the book called The Lum Rim Year. And it's another, it was published by, is it FPMT publication? If you want the specifics, you know, you can email me and I'll send it to you. But it's the same source that I used for the meditation in the last class. So this is from day 112 in the Lum Rim Year. It's kind of hard to say. And so the opening quote is just like the quote that I just read, actually. Reflecting on death is not intended to scare us into depression, but to wake us up. Lama Zopa Rinpoche. All right, so this is his writing. So I'll just go through this slowly, and then there are a couple of questions. There's nothing to be afraid of about death. Death is not difficult. It's nothing more than the consciousness leaving the body. That's all. The connection with the body finishes. The mind leaves the body and finds another one. On this basis, why does death appear so difficult and frightening to so many people? It's not death itself that is frightening, but the mind's projections about death that make us afraid. Our own mind creates the fear, not death itself. The concept of a fearful death has been created by the mind that clings to the permanent things of this world, all the things that will be lost when death happens: our body, friends, possessions, and so forth. Not being able to let go of life and the things of this life, then death becomes terrifying. The unsubdued mind that is controlled by attachment to worldly pleasure creates this fear, not death itself. It's the creation of ignorance, attachment, and anger. And yet, even though it is nothing but a hallucination, we believe in this independent and frightening death. Wise fear is completely different. Instead of being afraid because of our delusions, we see how deluded we are and are afraid of our delusions, right? We see the suffering our delusions will cause us and are afraid of that suffering. Afraid enough to do something to avert it. We see samsara not as a beautiful park, but as a terrible prison that we are all trapped in. And from that, the wish arises to free not just ourselves, but all sentient beings. And so the first point then, it's not death itself, but the mind's projections about death that make us afraid. Death becomes terrifying when we are unable to let go of the things of this life. And then lastly, instead of being afraid because of our delusions, we should be afraid of our delusions. Okay. So actually, if you've got this publication, Lam Rim Year, it includes a point-by-point teaching on the 9-point meditation on death. So they, for example, day 112 was just one of a series of meditations on this topic. So it's really, really helpful. I didn't do justice to the topic by just rattling them off. You really need to go back and work with these. So the discussion questions, or whatever you want to call these, if you're interested in writing about some of these, sharing your thoughts. The first is to identify the suffering of change in your own experience, bring up 1 or 2 examples. Think about how the suffering of change applies to, your own life. The second is, in your experience, how can meditation on impermanence be helpful for developing compassion for, yourself and for others? And then the last idea is to practice this 9-point meditation on death, and then see, how does that meditation maybe change your attitude towards life. So those are some suggestions. If there's anything else, that strikes you about what we've been talking about that you would like to share your thoughts on, or if you want some feedback, please feel free to send it to me. I typed a couple of the questions into the chat, and I have my laptop thingy here if you want to come over and just snap a picture of it if you're in the room and you have no way of remembering all these great ideas. I also do have the link to the 9-point meditation on death.
But they're posted in the questions, like up on, that we can look at online, or like?
No,
Okay.
I don't have a good way of doing this because I don't know. Yeah.
Anila, and just to be clear, the meditation that you did just now,
Uh-huh.
that is all from the 9-point meditation on death from FMPT?
It's in a publication called the Lam Rim Year, and it's by yeah, I'm going to type it in the chat. Lam Rim Year. It's a free download as a PDF.
It costs you more in ink than the book, though.
It's like, yeah.
Oh, is it?
I just read it online. I mean, I just read the PDF, but yeah. It's Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe and
Thank you.
one meditation per day.
Sounds doable.
Oh, you'll love it. Any other questions or comments before we adjourn?
Just
Any
that-
thoughts?
I felt like I walked in on a movie 3/4 of the way through. Buddhism in a nutshell, if I was walking into a, hi, good morning, Buddha, this cool guy, and talk. I felt like this is an ongoing series, an ongoing class.
This is
So,
class,
like-
yeah, 3 out of 4.
So this is number 3.
Yes,
So I missed 1 and 2.
right.
So I kind of feel like I'm lost. Like I know some of the concepts and all the kind of stuff, a lot of things we talked about, very cool. And I still feel like I walked in having not studied or not knowing this other stuff to make this more flow for me today.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
The first 2 classes are available on our website. If Chappelle's loaded them onto YouTube,
Yep.
they're
on-
available. Yep,
Okay, but
They're loaded.
is there one that's just
awesome, thank you.
simpler? Hi, this is Buddha. He was this guy who was a prince. And then he decided he saw a dead body and then he started his path. And so there's none of that going on, right? You guys are all past that.
Well,
You
sort
mentioned
of.
Last week, that other people said.
What's that?
A good place to start, because I asked a similar question. The book you mentioned last week?
The Book of Joy. Are you looking for maybe a different reading material?
Yeah,
That's a
well,
good
I
one.
found this book and I gave it away and she never gave it back to me. The World's Religions by John Houston or something like that. And he breaks down all the major religions.
Uh-huh.
And doesn't say one's better than the other or anything, but just explains it. And it gave me a really good introduction to Buddhism.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna need
I
to
should read
it.
that.
It's been years, see, so
Mm,
some of this stuff is faded away,
mm.
but it gave me a great introduction to Buddhism.
There's,
Cool.
T also has this like 8-part or 10-part series of an introduction to Buddhism, and they got videos, Richard Gere's even on them, actually.
Discovering Buddhism.
Yeah, like discovering Buddhism, and there's like a
That's the
bunch
whole
of
course.
modules, and those are great. Like
Mm.
I looked through them and
My
why
brother helped build Richard Gere's Buddhist temple,
I didn't know it had one. That's cool.
and then anyway, that was, because you mentioned Richard Gere stuff.
Yeah, that was something that just stuck out to me. I was like,
But anyway, so now, once you get to class 4 next week, you start with 1 again? Or is this just a 1 through 4, and I just caught it on 3? Or it's
Yeah.
a year thing?
Yeah, but like I said, John Cirillo is going to be doing a teaching series of classes on death, and once Geshe Darge, our main teacher, comes back, he'll be here in March. Then he's continuing
Yeah.
giving a
Amila, there's also another good one coming from Ken Rinpoche, the abbot of Saramay. He's talking about the 4 Noble Truths, and he's doing that on Tuesday night on the 30th of January, and then the following Tuesday night. That's another really good one if you're just starting out.
Is that here?
And he's a wonderful teacher,
online.
as well as all our teachers.
It's on
Yeah.
online? He's not this. Oh, okay. Oh.
Gloria, it's only online, right? Ken Rinpoche's in India, right?
Yeah, he's going to be calling in from India very, very early in the morning for us. So this one will start at 7:30 on Tuesday night because of that time difference. I think it's 6 a.m. in India.
Will the Dalai Lama be stopping by anytime soon? No?
No. Yeah, and a long time ago.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I got another weird thought. Okay, when you reach Nirvana,
Uh-huh.
it's at the top, you still walk the earth?
So once you've attained that state, then you can manifest, you can emanate as different, people or creatures, other kinds of living beings, whatever would meet the needs of a certain, group, people or individuals.
There's what, 7 billion people on the earth? Whatever,
Mhm.
something like that.
Yeah.
When all of them reach nirvana and leave, will the earth be empty?
Well, no, there are more people coming.
The bottom's not top.
No? But I mean, we reach the
More people
state-
being born,
when you
right?
reach the state, you stop being reborn,
Yeah,
because you've obtained. Once you've done that, you've left.
yeah.
So in theory, all 7 billion people could reach nirvana and leave, and the earth would be empty again.
Oh, because nobody else is being born? Like they never have kids?
Live enough life, because you've already done it.
Mm.
You've already reached the top.
Maybe he's talking about the great enlightenment when every sentient being in all worlds and universes are reaching Buddhahood. I mean.
I think that's what he's saying.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, everybody comes to the goal, we all reached, where we're going here or whatever. And that the earth would be empty of human beings, which would probably be a better place for the earth.
Not
And the animals would have a chance to grow and learn.
Well, there you go. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for coming. It's good to see you, Eric. Oh, I'll be here.
Get there.
I'm still trying to hit the